Good evening, afternoon, night, morning. When you find or watch, listen to this podcast, it is me, Omar Bora, the Burger Popper, on Saturday, May 18th, bright and early out here in El Paso, out of the Mountain Time Zone, 7:14 in the morning. But when you have a fiance who is celebrating her brother's birthday and just wants the weekends with you, then you got to make these sacrifices. So I'm always willing to talk ball anytime, any team, anywhere. Call me 2020 Zach Wilson with the BYU headband. But I am joined by a guest I'm so excited to have on the podcast. A guest that we've been communicating with each other, I guess, just through kind of a strange circumstance, just through the old USFL, me being a Generals fan, and it was actually Southern Charm Sports added me to a Stallions group chat because he liked my vibe as USFL fan. And so here I am now with Luke Miller, one of the big voices of Birmingham Stallions coverage. Luke, thank you for joining the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. I know we've been talking about doing this, so glad we finally able to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Luke is one of the loud voices of the Birmingham Stallions fandom, the Birmingham Stallions coverage. He runs State of the Stallions, the Twitter page. So you can see him on that account, State of the Stallions, as well as he's been doing a lot of local news coverage, which is really amazing out in Alabama. Was on I think a Birmingham station before, and then now a Montgomery station this week. So definitely a very present voice in Stallions coverage, but he's also a very present voice for CW for the CW's college football coverage. And I think we are both very vocal in the movement of college football moving back to network TV, bringing college football back to the fans, doing the opposite of what the NFL is doing by putting big games like the Christmas Day games. They are my favorite games of the year. I mean, I was so excited when my Niners played on Christmas Day. It was a dream come true until the game actually happened. But putting those games behind a paywall for the fans. For us with the CW, I don't care who's playing. These are games on network TV, games that are accessible for the fans, especially in these tough economic times. And so we are both two leading voices for college football in the CW, and that is the main point of our discussion today. But I almost forgot we got something huge at the end. We have a decision that can alter the course of history, a decision that can alter the course of Mr. Luke Miller's life. We have the decision where he will be choosing his new favorite Arena Football League team after the tragic death of the Minnesota Myth. We won't be playing taps. You can play that in your head.
RIP.
Yeah, you can have a moment of silence too, but he'll be choosing his favorite Arena Football League team. And I've said before, I know which team I want him to choose. But I don't know if he's gonna choose it. We might have a lot of angry AFL fan bases, or maybe single digits AFL fans just getting angry about his decision. I know you had one Minnesota Myth fan coming after you about I guess before week one, you doubting whether the league would be able to play, and she had some choice words for you. So
Yeah, hindsight, I think my concerns were fairly valid, but that's fine. That's fine. If you can't take the heat, you got to get out of the kitchen. So, if the AFL fans want to come at me, I was blocked by the main account, but hopefully they're in the process of getting me unblocked now. We'll see.
yeah, the process either stretching out their fingers so they can hit the unblock button on the screen. Um, but yeah, so I'm very excited for this podcast. So, but keep in mind at the end, the decision we gotta sell the sizzle, not the steak. We gotta sell the sizzle first and talk about our topic. But so the CW, Washington State and Oregon State released their schedule this year, and I just love this arrangement with the CW. And I mean, I love first and foremost how it works out for the Big Sky. You have Idaho State and Portland State, not even the class of the Big Sky, just through mere happenstance, getting an appearance on network TV. And this is just great recruiting for both schools, honestly. And I mean, I've talked about it on the podcast before, so I won't go too much into it. But last year, we had North Alabama take a 14-0 lead on Florida State in front of over 1 million viewers on network TV. So this is great stuff for these programs. But overall, Luke, some highlights. What were some of your favorite highlights of the schedule? Whether it be kickoff times, whether it be, I guess, opponents for the Washington State and Oregon State CW deal.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I mean, I think in some ways it's a perfect match because you've got, two institutions with very storied histories and fantastic football programs that unfortunately have really been sort of left behind by the realignment that's happening in college football. And so, two programs that have sort of been overlooked. And then you've got a sort of a historic broadcast network channel that is kind of trying to make this foray into sports, into college sports, but isn't obviously taken quite as seriously or as well maybe known or respected in terms of sports as the big dogs. And so I think it's an opportunity for both of them to sort of pair up and prove that a, this is football that's really worth watching, and b, this is a channel that can produce it at a really high level. So I think it's a great pairing. I'm really excited about it because I think um, you've got, like you mentioned, a kind of a wide array of times. I mean, I think people have already started the tweets about CW after dark, which I'm totally here for. And I think if they can kind of, that was obviously one of the unique things about the Pac-12 that people loved was the sort of late night Pac-12 after dark games. And unfortunately, we won't quite get that same thing. And I don't know, just something about like Big Ten after dark or whatever, or ACC after dark just doesn't have quite the same ring to it when again, what sort of has gone on to make that happen. But CW after dark, it just sort of fits, I feel like. So definitely excited for some of those later night games. And I think, with Oregon State and Washington State, obviously, I can't wait to see them play each other on the CW. I think there'll be a lot of excitement and energy put into that sort of marquee matchup. And then, I think it's going to be great to see some of these Mountain West teams on broadcast television regularly as well that they've kind of partnered up with in terms of scheduling. And it'll be interesting to see like how where the Pac-12 goes from here, and sort of what is next is beyond the next year or two. But Lord willing, I would love to see this be something that lasts for beyond just a year or two, and eventually you know this is become sort of a place where we get kind of some maybe not the prime time games that are going to be promoted in terms of the new Big Ten conference or SEC conference, but some maybe other exciting matchups that end up landing there because Oregon State and Washington State are maybe able to schedule some unique sort of out of conference games like they've already been working on. So I'm really excited about it. I think it's great for those two institutions. I think it's great for the CW, and I think both in terms of, like you mentioned, some smaller, whether it be FCS or smaller FBS schools getting the chance to get that sort of exposure, or whether it being some bigger, more iconic brands being on a different sort of network than they're used to being on, and continuing to show people the quality of the production of that network. I think it's going to be a win-win for a lot of people.
Yeah, I do agree. And you mentioned like the bigger brand names. I'm thinking about next year when both Washington State and Oregon State will host their perspective or their respective in-state rivals, which I believe they will. I know this year's, at least for Washington State, this year's game is at the Seahawks Stadium. So I think next year's game will be Washington State home game, and then the same thing for Oregon State, where
Mhm.
next year's Civil War will be a home game. So like getting Oregon and getting Washington, those are huge, huge. That's a huge, huge win for the CW to get those programs for next year because the whole Pac-2 situation likely will not be figured out next year. And so I mean it's just great seeing like the name brands and seeing the CW kind of get some of those brand names too and be a household name in college football broadcasting because the one time that they had Florida State last year, I think it was their most watched game on the CW. Of course, some of that is due to the rankings at the time where Florida State was number 4 in the CFP poll. But I mean, that's just huge viewership for what ended up being a paycheck game against North Alabama. And also too, like they put in the presentation beforehand. I mean, I remember watching the presentation
Yeah.
for the Florida State, like they acted like it was, they were broadcasting the Super Bowl when it was just the least important game on Florida State's schedule. So it's definitely a huge win. And the CW is kind of, I mean, it's great to see them kind of step up more into sports broadcasting because our next point is they're trying to sublicense more from ESPN Plus. And I think the whole sublicensing thing, it is a huge win because we've seen other conference or other broadcasters do it. We have the NFL Network doing their sub license of ESPN Plus games, and if you're an NFL fan, it's a great way to those those sub license games are a great way to reel in the uh the casual college football fan who follows NFL more, who has NFL Network, who watches NFL Total Access. Rest in peace, by the way. Uh, who watches, those NFL games, especially the ones that are NFL Network exclusives, to have those games. But the CW is thinking of licensing, sub-licensing some ESPN Plus games on their network, and maybe like building some triple headers during the college football season. So, Luke, I have to ask, uh, if you were the CW, I guess the lead of sports programming, which conferences would you want to try to sub-license content on for a Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, I think I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this one because one that comes to mind um, as far as just building out the programming is, you know, what about the United Athletic Conference? I mean, I think that that's a conference that has some pretty big aspirations, and you know, we've maybe seen some cracks in the foundation of that conference, and I'm interested to see where that conference goes with some of the movement that's already happened. And um, you know, yeah, I don't know what the future of that conference is, but what I do know is that it was at least formed with some big aspirations. They do have some hopes of being sort of a marquee FCS conference in terms of football, and potentially, obviously, has been discussed, potentially even one day making the transition into FBS. Again, whether or not that can happen, remains to be seen. But given their aspirations, given the quality of programs that are in the conference, and the sort of respect and attention that they're trying to sort of garner, I think being able to be on broadcast television would go a long way to getting eyeballs on the product, to gaining respect, to getting more people to be able to see some of these bigger FCS programs they have. So that's one that comes to mind for me where I could see it potentially being a good another good pairing. And that's also again a conference with for better or for worse, it's a conference with a fairly decent geographical reach. So it's not sort of isolated to one sort of region of the country. And so again, I think that's another reason that broadcast television makes a lot of sense for a conference like that. Um, so that's one for me that comes to mind. I'd be interested to hear what you think about that or other ones that come to mind for you.
For me, so I was actually not expecting to hear the UAC at all, honestly, because for the most part too, it's like yes, they have big aspirations, but when I think FCS football and the heart of FCS football, like the big programs, I'm thinking Big Sky,
Yeah,
I'm thinking Missouri Valley Conference. I'm thinking those two leagues. The UAC though, like I mean, of course, they're not a bad conference at all. They have some solid programs. Austin P last year, Scotty Walden, coached good enough this past year that he's down here in UTEP, replaced
yeah,
some Dana Dimmel, right? Tarleton State. Tarleton is, I wouldn't say they're a sleeping giant. I don't even know if that's like the right term because they've never had like huge success. They don't have like a rich history in the FCS level, but I guess it is the right term because they have a growing student base, and they're going to be a factor in FCS and likely FBS if Conference USA does choose to expand to, I think, 16. I think they're at 14 right now. I kind of lost count. Or no, they're at 12 because Delaware, Kennesaw State. Yeah. So if
yeah. I
they
think
choose to
12. Yeah,
expand to 14, yeah, I think if they choose to expand to 14 and add two more schools, I just don't think the casual fan, I think when you have games on the CW, if there was a conference if there were conferences to to attract the casual viewer in the FCS, it would be first the Ivy League,
yeah,
then the SWAC, and then the MEAC, of course. And
yeah.
first, I'm going to start off with the Ivy League, right? I think there is nothing cozier than starting off the day with a noon kickoff at of an Ivy League game to lead into either an ACC game or a Washington State game. I think if they were to sublicense some Ivy League games, I think that they would get some viewership because the thing I mentioned on Twitter was if it's there and it's accessible or highly accessible, people are going to watch it to some degree. And I look at last year's Cornell versus Harvard game, which I want to thank the MLB playoffs for their playoff format for freeing up a Friday night and allowing that game to be broadcast on ESPN2, which was both schools or which was Cornell's first ESPN2 appearance since I think the early 90s. But that game drew 153,000 viewers, which you laugh now, but that's very solid viewership for an FCS game. And I'm sorry, I got to do it. It's almost 10 times the viewers that SMU Charlotte got last year on ESPNU. I got it. Sorry, that's my
Touche.
baseline for that's my baseline for every viewership number. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You
It's
just
all right. It's all right.
happen to be in the cross.
I'll handle this off air.
Oh man, I'm scared. Sorry. But yeah, so I'd say the Ivy League. And then like for my thing with the SWAC and the MEAC, I think just looking at the CW's history, and I think this is just I didn't expect to get into broadcast history, I guess like a network history, but a lot of people know that the CW is a merger of UPN and shoot, it's already escaped my mind, and the WB, right? And I think it was UPN or either one, UPN or WB was a pioneer in getting black starred sitcoms, black starred shows on network TV. So with that in mind, I think it's fitting that the SWAC and the MEAC, if that out of the FCS, you have an HBCU game to start off the day. They're already looking like they already. I think there is a network platform or a syndication platform, HBCU Go, which already syndicates games on to various local channels. I remember last year when I was in New York City for Jackson's wedding, my co-host, he I was like flipping channels, just like waiting for the rehearsal to finish. And I saw on the local, I think WPix channel, they had the Chicago Football Classic between Mississippi Valley State and Central State. So there's already some network TV presence with HBCUs, but just with the history of UPN and WB, which I know I'm going to get some hate for not knowing which exact network some of these shows aired on. But I mean, I think it's fitting. So I'd go honestly with the FCS. You got to go, I think, the big three in terms of name brands.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the UAC came to mind for me again just because of some of the aspirations that they've espoused. So at least, so more on their end, I could see it being a good partnership. On the CW's end, maybe not as much because I do think you're right. I mean, to be fair, guys like yourself, maybe me to some extent, like we know about the Tarleton States, right? Like we know about, the Austin Peas, but yeah, I mean, somebody that lives in Oregon that's flipping on the TV an hour early before, an Oregon State CW game probably couldn't put Austin P on a map, right? But I'm sure that that person probably knows about Yale, right? I'm sure they probably have heard of Harvard. So I do think the Ivy League, because of their academic reputation and because of how well they're known for that reason, it does make a lot of sense that those are household names. Again, maybe not for athletic reasons, but they are household names, and people, if they flip it on, they're going to know who they're watching, and so I think that is wise. And I mean, I love the HBCU idea. I mean, especially the SWAC. I'm a little bit more familiar with the SWAC than the MEAC, just because um, the SWAC is headquartered in Birmingham. But I think HBCUs have sort of had a moment in the last 5 years or so, right? Just for lots of different reasons. Some sad, some happy. But to a more happier reason, right? Like, with Coach Prime when he was at, JSU, obviously that got a ton of attention on JSU. The Coach Prime documentary that was on Amazon got a lot of people to see not only the really like cool, exciting, thrilling journey that he was on in coaching at a HBCU program, but I think it also exposed people a little bit who watched it. And as well, again, on the more positive side, like the culture and the history behind the HBCUs and the fan bases, the marching bands, like all that goes into it. But it also exposed people, I think, to the lack of resources that HBCUs are dealing with and the ways that they've been underfunded and undersupported, and like how they're sort of doing more with less. And so I think that, again, because of the sort of cultural moment we're in, because of Coach Prime, because of some of these other things that have happened, I think HBCUs are more on people's radar. And again, like as you mentioned, given the history of the network and all those kinds of things, I think it could be a really great pairing and a really great way for more people to see not only incredible football that is played in a conference like the SWAC. But also, I mean, with the CW's again production potential to really give people an insight into the HBCU culture and the HBCU life, right? Like, it would be sick if they had some kind of, feature every week of like a marching band that was in the HBCU, right? Because like people that have seen that before, like myself, or know what is that's like. I mean, you know, uh, it's it nothing, no other sort of like. I saw a funny tweet where somebody was like, hyping up Ohio State's marching band, which, not to slide Ohio State, but, somebody, it was kind of like, this person's never seen the HBCU marching band and it shows. So, I mean, I think there's really unique, celebratory, awesome aspects to HBCU football and HBCU culture. And I think to get a national platform to continue to sort of raise awareness, and appreciation and celebration of those things, I think would be awesome. So yeah, I'm on board with you with some of those ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the interesting thing too is it can also serve as a way to educate the masses about the rich NFL talent that has come from
Yeah,
HBCUs. I mean, why not have like Doug Williams in the booth for a game and everything? Because everyone, I mean, if you're a casual football fan, you know about Doug Williams, you know about
yeah,
that's I think Super Bowl 23, like you know about that. But also something else that came to mind is like I wouldn't say the whole Patriot League is marketable, but looking at November 23rd, why not have Lafayette Lehigh on the CW? I think enough casual football fans know about Lafayette Lehigh, the rivalry, the most played rivalry in college football, that could honestly be a good lead in because that's typically a throwaway week.
yeah.
The week before Thanksgiving. I mean, that where the SEC plays all of its trash games. I know last year that spot was occupied by that was the week of the Florida State North Alabama game. So that last week of the FCS season could have some scorching action. I mean, might even have like a game with FCS playoff implications. Going on to the FBS, I guess in terms of FBS conferences, which conferences would you like to see partner with the CW?
Yeah, I mean, I like the partnerships that they have now. Like we talked about, I'm a big fan of the Pac-12 thing. Um, if you can't tell from my, SMU Mustangs hoop shirt here, um, am a supporter of the Mustangs, pony up. And so I really like the ACC partnership that they have, where some of their other games that might not be on as that might end up on ESPNU, like you talked about, or ESPN Plus even, or some other properties, end up getting pushed to the CW. I mean, I think that's been great for the ACC, and I've been, you know a big proponent and enjoyer of that. I mean, I think, in terms of the FBS, I mean, I think one conference that, I mean, again, maybe this is just, some of my, a regional bias showing here, but I've become really familiar with the Sun Belt, in recent years, and I know they've got some ESPN, an ESPN sort of deal in place, but again, some of their games obviously get pushed to ESPN Plus, or maybe some lower ESPN channels, because they're a supposed so-called Group of Five conference. But I followed the Sun Belt really closely, over the last few years because I'm originally from West Virginia. I grew up going to Marshall games. Still am a big fan and supporter of them. And then also having moved to Alabama and living in Alabama, and getting to see Troy football and the quality of that. And, now Southern Miss also came over to the Sun Belt from Conference USA, and, some of the other kind of regional schools down there. I mean, I think the Sun Belt's got, some really exciting, great games that have been happening in that league. And it is more sort of regionally bound, unlike, some of these bigger FBS conferences we're talking about, that sort of thing. But, I mean, I think they've had some fantastic games that, especially, if you're going to have, maybe some other, like for example, ACC games, where you're getting viewers potentially out of, maybe, South Carolina for a Clemson game, or maybe North Carolina, and you're kind of in that sort of Sun Belt region, um, you know, sort of having maybe a Sun Belt sort of FBS matchup on prior to a lead in of, two sort of Southeastern or East Coast teams, I think could help maybe people maybe to see that, like, okay, yeah, there's some really great football that's happening near me, right? Like maybe a Clemson fan before their game is a Coastal Carolina game, right? Who's been a great program, who's had some fantastic teams in recent years. Um, Grayson McCall obviously was a kind of became a household name, even beyond just the again so supposed G5 level. So I mean, I think if you have maybe some more casual, bigger name program fans like a Clemson or something like that, and kind of being able to pair that up with maybe a lead in from a Sun Belt team or a Sun Belt conference game that again is sort of in that sort of similar, mostly kind of geographic area. It could be a good way to kind of maybe piggyback off some of that momentum. So that's one that comes to mind. I mean, I think any of them could, and so, any I think FBS conference, especially again the sort of so-called G5 conferences, I think there's reasons maybe that it could be a good pairing. But again, just because of my own story and my own biases and leagues I follow closely, that's one that comes to mind for me. But how about you?
Yeah, so I'm gonna throw in my own biases. So I'm gonna say the American because I think when you think about sub-licensing, it's gonna come out of the group of five,
Yeah,
right? And I think the biggest brand names in the group of five are the service academies. And I think the American had a ton of games on ESPN Plus last year. And Army, of course, like they have their road games against AAC opponents. And I think if you are the CW, you want brand names, you want names with national because the ACC, yes, it's a Power Five conference, but I guess there was very much a regional kind of regional following, regional
yeah,
flair to the ACC where it's like it's hard to get fans in California, or it was hard to get fans in California interested in say Wake Forest versus Boston College, and that's just the nature of the thing. On the other hand, you have Army, you have, a lot of people that either served in the military or know someone that was in the military and everything. So with Army and Navy, I don't see why they wouldn't sublicense games. I guess early afternoon games potentially as lead in state ACC for a lead in state ACC games. So I think
yeah,
the American is definitely a prime candidate for that, and I think as you'll see in a podcast that will drop on Tuesday, I was talking to Brock Vieira of Midnight Sports today. I think the American needs it because they're falling behind the Mountain West in terms of exposure, in terms of getting these big tentpole type games. So the American comes to mind. I also would not be with the Mac. I think the Mac is great too, especially with the addition of, excuse me, of UMass
hmm
in that big Boston market, which I don't think they don't own the market, but it's still a huge presence in Boston and of course throughout New England too. Of course, like one of the most concentrated areas in terms of population in the country. So I'd say the Mac too. I mean, and that's just my biases too. I'm about to start
yeah.
covering the Mac for the hustle belt. So gotta throw in that plug. But yeah, those are the two that come to mind. I mean, if you're building that inventory, you're building that national sort of reputation.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I almost mentioned the American, but then I didn't because I felt like it almost maybe seemed a little too obvious. But I mean, I think the American makes a ton of sense. And in addition to the fact, like you said, that you've got some national brands in the service academy and that sort of thing, you do also just have a wider geographic reach, than some of the other group of five conferences. Like again, you've got all the way from, down here in Texas, all the way up to Temple, Philadelphia and kind of in between. And so, yeah, you might not have a strong West Coast, I guess, presence, but again, they're sort of the Mountain West, like you talked about. And, but I think you do have sort of some of the, I'm a big proponent of the American. Obviously, SMU was in the American for quite a while. UAB is now in the American, who I follow a lot and follow closely. And there's some really fantastic programs and players in that conference. I mean, I think it's kind of perceived as, potentially, again, like you mentioned, the Mountain West, but I think a lot of people sort of see it as the premier group of five conference for a reason. And so, I think it's great that they've got a deal with ESPN in place. Like that seemed to have been a good partnership for them. But like you mentioned, you know, there's a lot of football that's getting played, and you can't, especially with the growth of these bigger name conferences like the Big Ten and SEC and whatnot, and them gobbling up all these programs and therefore TV windows. Like you can't have all of the best American games on network TV in, you know, if unless you sort of do something like, you know, the MAC has had to do where they go to midweek and like everybody loves, you know, sort of Maction and the midweek games and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, at some point, like I think that is one solution to the situation, right? And like I think it takes probably a multi-pronged sort of strategy. So I don't think we should move away from some of those midweek games. But on the other hand, you know, you've got the opportunity maybe to say, okay, well, hey, on a Saturday afternoon or something like that, instead of getting pushed to ESPN Plus or whatever and barely getting this game, any eyeballs in this game, why not have it on broadcast TV where it's going to be played across the country? And again, it might be followed up by some more, you know, well-known household names, brands that people will be sort of tuning into. So I think the American makes a lot of sense. And honestly, I mean, you know, I don't I think Conference USA could maybe make some sense too. I mean, I think Conference USA like somehow refuses to die and they just keep um trucking along like despite just getting picked over every time there's realignment. Um, you know, I think obviously you got to give a lot of credit to them with what they've been able to pull off, and again, their geographical reach has kind of continued to sort of widen, right, because of realignment. And again, they don't maybe necessarily have all of the some of the same name recognition that again, like you mentioned, the military academies do, or some of the programs in the American do. But I mean, Liberty has, I think, become a pretty well-known program, and they have like 4 gajillion billion million online students like all across the country. So I don't know like how much of those students actually care about Liberty athletics, but I think some of them do. So I mean, I think Liberty's growing, like becoming more of a well-known sort of somewhat national brand for them, and you know, and then you know you've got again kind of all the way from you know out in El Paso, kind of you know, and everywhere in between there. So you know that's another program that I think. Or another conference, excuse me, that I think, you know, I could see maybe potentially wanting to get into the mix and wanting to get some more eyeballs on their product. They're kind of again going the Maction route and getting some midweek games, but for their weekend games, you know, they might have some solid matchups that you know, rather than just being on ESPN Plus, you know, it could be really great to get them on broadcast TV too. So, um, I've learned you can never count Conference USA out, and you know, don't call it a comeback. So, you know, a potential pairing with them in the CW could work well too.
Yeah, I mean, I agree on that last point with Conference USA, where it's like you want to give reasons because this is something I'm afraid of as a now member of a or now fan of a member of the American with Army, that the American has always just been a stepping stool, a stepping
Yeah.
stone to get to other leagues, and that with the implosion of the ACC, like I don't think that they're gonna accept Army and Navy as football only members, which I mean it would be great for sure. Compare I guess I'm biased too compared to the rest of the American compared, but I mean Army and Navy being in the ACC, they're going to want all sports members, and Army and Navy will never be able to compete in the ACC in basketball, much less the American. I mean, that's why they're in the Patriot League. But I like Conference USA because you want to give schools a reason to stay in your league, and I think a great partnership that sublicenses games to the CW. That's a great way to keep schools in your league, like to keep, say, a New Mexico State, to keep UTEP from going from the Mountain West, because the Mountain West, they have great exposure. They have 3 games a year on CBS. Now, granted, only a few schools will ever appear on CBS out of the Mountain West, out of that deal, but I'd say it's still a pretty lucrative deal money wise, and there's still always that hope that if you host a good enough Power Five team, that you're going to be on CBS and everything. So I think Conference USA doing that would be a great way to keep schools in the league. Not that honestly, I think come the next realignment cycle, if like the American had to pick schools, I don't think a lot of those schools fit the profile of American schools and whatnot. Um, Excuse me. I think Conference USA just has to worry about the Western schools being picked off by the Mountain West should something happen. in the next realignment, especially for the Pac-2, especially if something should happen for the Pac-2. But yeah, I definitely agree that Conference USA is. I think it's just all about when it comes to partnering with the CW. It's all about doing something different and just like taking a shot and just giving. I think if you partner with the CW, I think you give the game back to the fans. Like, I mean, bottom line up front, you give the game back to the fans. You take it away from the streaming services, which I'm an ESPN Plus subscriber. It's great. It's a great value, the amount of content you get. But at the end of the day, you're still paying $10 a month, or I think it's $11 a month for that. Rather than the CW, all you have to do is buy an antenna just once and it's there. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
And yeah, and I'll always be a big proponent of the CW for that reason. I mean, that's why I was really excited when they started to get more into sports last year. And I understand it's just the nature of the beast. Like more things are moving to streaming. It's sort of unavoidable at this point in time, and we'll see where that goes and how long that lasts and all that kind of thing. But I think to have a broadcast channel get into the mix again, it sort of goes against the current, right? Of you know I think in the same way that I get really nervous about sort of the consolidation and monopolization of, for example, the Power Five in college athletics, I get nervous about the consolidation or monopolization of particular TV networks on sports properties. And so I think, like you said, to me, the CW reverses that trend in some way where instead of ESPN gobbling up every single event that's happening and then just pushing it to their streaming service or whatever because they only have so many broadcast windows they can broadcast stuff. The CW not only does it give an alternative platform, but again, it's an alternative platform that's incredibly accessible. Like it's broadcast TV, and so I think it's sort of what we need more of and what we're not getting. And so I was excited about it in general, but then I tuned in last year and it's a great product. I mean, I thought the announcers were fantastic. They took it seriously. They put a lot of effort into it. They did a great job, which only made me a bigger supporter and bigger fan of kind of what they're doing. So, um, for both of those reasons, like I'm going to keep kind of beating the CW drum. And again, like I said, I think this pairing with the Pac-12 and or Pac-2 is great because I think again, it's an opportunity to sort of even if you like for me, I have no real connection to either of these programs, right? Like I've never lived Texas is the furthest west I've lived. I don't make a lot of trips out west generally. Like I've been to Oregon and Washington once in my life. Like I have no real strong connection to Washington, Oregon State, either program outside of the fact that like I've seen them on TV growing up. I've watched, Minshew Mania and Mike Leach and, some of the great Oregon State programs and players that they've had there. But this is it's sort of like everything. It's sort of the opposite of everything that I feel like lots of people feel like is wrong with college athletics right now, right? Like it's the two programs that sort of got screwed by all the realignment. It's a network that doesn't have the same sort of historic control over college athletics like ESPN or Fox or some of these other ones do. So even if you don't have any sort of strong ties to these programs or you've never watched the CW before, I think there's a lot of reasons to tune in and to sort of show the people that, watch these streaming numbers or broadcast numbers, viewership numbers, like that this is what we want more of. We want college athletics to be more accessible to people. And we want programs that aren't just the Alabamas, the Ohio States, the Michigans, the Florida States to be able to be viewed by people across the country. So, again, the casual fan might not see it that way, but I think for a lot of us, a good number of us, we can make our voice heard in that way.
Yeah, and just I guess just to add to that point before we head to the decision, um, I think the one thing that jumped out to me was a Friday night game, San Jose State versus Washington State, where that so there, I mean the news in the prior month was Fox having a weekly Friday night game, which is cool. I think it's great. It's great that there's more net TV, there's more network TV, and it's like yeah, people are complaining about high school football. It's like high school football is hardly a community event unless you're a parent, right? I mean, if you're a parent, your kid's playing a game, like, yes, of course. But it's like, I don't think casual people on a Friday night are going to just go to a high school game just because, I mean, if you're a football guy, yeah, but I mean, if you're a football guy, you also watch something that's on TV. But I digress. I move on from that. But I mean, a lot of those matchups on Fox are probably going to be like Power Five, like manufactured Power Five games. Like I've been telling my best friend, like, hey man, like I'm not gonna lie, the Big 12 is borderline unwatchable for me because it's like why it's just a whole bunch of randomness. Is why is a team from Arizona playing in the same conference as Cincinnati? Why is Arizona in the same conference as UCF? At least, and people would call me a hypocrite with the American. Like, yes, it's the same thing with the American, but excuse me, the American also has ties with Conference USA, or I mean, essentially, it's like the old Conference USA, at least in the beginning, when you look at Memphis, East
Yeah.
Carolina, Tulane, Army. That's an old Memphis slash Metro Conference where you had these schools that 30 years ago essentially formed this union so they could stop being independents. So yes, that's kind of random too, but I mean, for the sake of TV, like that's why the Big 12 kind of exists like right now. So a lot of those games are kind of unwatchable. Where you have a game on a Friday night, Washington or September 20th, Washington State versus San Jose State, where that's a game both schools are on the West Coast. That's a huge game for the San Jose State program. I think their first network TV appearance since 2020 when they played in the Mountain West title game against Boise State. And that game drew 1.4 million viewers. I was one of them. I chose to watch that game over Notre Dame Clemson, the ACC title game that year. But yeah, like I mean, I think matchups like that capture the heart of college fans more because I think college fans are starting to get fed up, honestly, with a lot of things. And it's gonna show in the viewership, honestly, because I don't think many college football fans, unless it's a game of the century type game, have much of a reason to watch like Utah versus UCF on a regular basis. It just
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. And so yeah, this is my point there, I guess, in terms of capturing the true heart of college football fans, because we're starting to get lost.
Yeah, and I mean, we could give a million examples, right? But I mean, yeah, I'm a graduate of the University of Minnesota, so I love Minnesota. I love the Gophers. I follow the Big Ten for that reason. But like at the same time, it's the same thing, right? Like, yeah, if Washington and Michigan play, people are going to probably tune into that championship rematch. Like that's exciting. But like honestly, who wants to see like Oregon at Rutgers, right? Or who wants to see Northwestern at UCLA? Like those are not the games that people are clamoring for. I hate to break it to the network, executives, but I would rather watch, you know, Oregon State, versus a really solid Mountain West team, Oregon State, Fresno State game or something like that. That's going to be probably more competitive and more entertaining. And again, like you said, rationally make more sense than some of these pairings we're going to start getting with these sort of mega conferences that span across the country. So, um, and again, maybe not everyone feels that way, but like you said, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of us that do, and I think hopefully that'll make a big enough blimp on the viewership of these games that it causes some people higher up to reevaluate, what they should be doing with these moves that they're making.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think we're able to turn back now, but maybe we can make things better, I guess, in the future. But I guess we just got to vote with our remote controls instead of voting with
That's
our
right.
feet, vote with our remote controls. So, with that being said, we have finally hit this point. I hope the nerves are out of the way for the decision for you, Luke, to pick your new favorite Arena Football League team. Which, as an IFL guy, I mean, I just got to say that I guess this is a privilege for me to give the AFL airtime as a huge IFL guy, but I'll allow it, since you're a friend. But we have three teams here. We have the Billings Outlaws, we got the Washington Wolfpack, we got the West Texas Desert Hawks. You can't go wrong with any of these. I mean, the Billings Outlaws, they got the stability, they got the rich pedigree in Champions Indoor Football League, which the Duke City Gladiators won twice in a row while I was in college. I just got to insert that there. Um, you got the Washington Wolfpack with the very, very sweet helmets and just the nice field setup. They have probably like the end zone font is just amazing. I've noticed the quirks like that. And you got the West Texas Desert Hawks. As a team that I want you to root for. Being out here in El Paso, you'll have a lot of the oil industry mad at you if you don't choose Odessa, if you don't choose the West Texas Desert Hawks. So you might have the big oil cartel pull a Boeing whistleblower on you, if you don't
Sure.
choose that one.
That's
So
true.
that's true. I guess what are your thoughts just going into the decision? I mean, is it has have you had any sleepless nights just trying to figure out which Arena Football League team you're gonna root for?
Well, I was pretty devastated when they took the myth from me because, you know, number one, I never even got to see a single one of their games because they had two games and neither one got streamed. So that was tragic. I bought a jersey and a sweatshirt and hyped the myth up for months just for them to not even stream one game for me. So that was tough. And two, I really loved the branding. I thought, for all the things that the AFL did wrong and for all the things that the myth did wrong, I really thought that the Myth brand was awesome, and loved the logo, loved the sort of story behind the brand. I thought it was very well done and very thoughtful and visually appealing and all that kind of thing. So it was tough to have to lose them, but then it was like, okay, well, if I'm going to continue following this thing and supporting this thing, I'd like to have like a team that I'm also kind of following and supporting. And these three teams stuck out to me. Um, Maybe I'll start by I'll narrow it down to two. So, unfortunately, I'm going to go ahead and have to eliminate the Washington Wolfpack, even though they were on my radar. The issue honestly with Washington is that I just have no connection to Washington in any way, shape, or form, or the Seattle area, and so it's just hard for me to pull for a team from there. Um, but I mean, I really seriously considered it because I love the branding, I love the stadium, I love the helmets, I love the logo, and the Myths logo was kind of a mythical wolf sort of creature, so there's sort of like that wolf connection. So, there were some reasons that I seriously considered it. But now, if you didn't hear, the Oregon Black Bears are coming back out of Salem, and they've kind of got that Oregon Washington rivalry. And I like the Black Bears branding and kind of vibe a lot too. So I don't know. I'm going to stay neutral in that rivalry, that budding rivalry up there in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm going to have to nix Washington, unfortunately, which leaves either Billings or West Texas. And this was a tough decision. I've kind of gone back and forth on it actually the last few days. I think Billings is, got one of the best owners in the league, Steve Titus, who's been speaking out on behalf of, some of the injustices that have taken place with the Arena Football League leadership and who's really been advocating for his players, making sure they're taken well care of. I've never been to Montana, but I always really have wanted to go, and it looks beautiful. So this maybe would give me an excuse to make my way up there at some point in my life. So there's a lot of reasons to like Billings. The Outlaws are an iconic, his sort of historic AFL, brand and that kind of thing. And then on the other hand, you've got the kind of more up and coming West Texas, uh, you know, franchise there, which, I'm currently living in Texas. So there's that connection. It's a little bit closer to me. Actually, geographically makes sense. It wasn't exactly a positive thing, but I also got shouted out by their social media account, which I think is the first time I've ever got directly tagged in a tweet by a professional football or sports franchise, of any sort. Um, and I got into a big Twitter spat with their head coach. So it's an opportunity to come full circle and really reconcile, and show people that there is hope beyond Twitter. Um, so, I don't know. Between Billings and West Texas, it's a very difficult choice. I'll certainly be pulling for both teams this season. But I think I'm gonna have to go with West Texas, the Desert Hawks. I can pull up to a game, meet you there. You can go meet we can meet sort of in the middle, coming from El Paso and the DFW area. And again, it's geographically close for me in that sense. It's not exactly close because driving across Texas isn't a it's like driving across three states anywhere else. Um, but I really like the Desert Hawks. They've got a fantastic mascot with Top Gunner. I think they also have a solid ownership group that's taking good care of their players. And despite my beef, my spats with their social media accounts, I think it's time to turn over a new leaf and get behind the Desert Hawks and support them on their way to their first AFL championship.
Wow. I mean that's a surprise for me because I did see Steven Titus shout you out, and I thought, man, that's got to be a shoe in. He's got to do it. Like, they gave you the time of day, but I really respect the decision. Now I'm looking at their schedule because like now I mean I'm in a frantic rush now to try to see a Desert Hawks home game. Which shoot, I don't even know now because I'm looking at an old schedule and has the Louisiana Voodoo as one of their home games. Jeez, so as a
Yeah, it's
as
hard
the
to know
ultimate
exactly when and where they'll be playing, so we'll have to get circle back on that one. But yeah, we're gonna have to try and pull up to. I've never been to Odessa, so this will
me
give me a
neither.
reason to go out there and see West Texas.
Yeah, I've never been there either. So wow, I mean, I really appreciate the decision. But for me, I mean, West Texas, they'll be my favorite AFL team, but my heart's still with the Gladiators because I've been with them since the champion indoor football league. I've been with them, I guess your character's tested when your team plays in a works progress administration building like Tingley Coliseum. Your loyalty's tested, and I was loyal the whole time to the Duke City Gladiators. So they have my heart. That's why I'm an IFL guy. IFL guy till I die. I think I might trademark that. But
There you go.
it's
Well,
funny because no,
go
go ahead.
ahead. I was
I was
just
gonna
gonna say
say it's
I'll be rocking with the Frisco Fighters too in the IFL. I can't betray my fighters, but I'll also be rocking with my Desert Hawks now.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe there'll be like a crossover like AFL, NFL, like settle things once and for all. Have to like one end zone has the rebound nets, other end zone has the hanging
There you go.
goalposts. I'd be interested in that. But it's funny just like with just talking about indoor football. I remember my junior year of college, like they're doing class introductions and then when they got to me, it was like name one interesting that happened to you this summer. And I said, my name's Omar Sean Borja. And one interesting thing that happened to me this summer is I got to see my local indoor football team win the conference championship, and they ended up winning the world championship when I before I guess after I had left after I left for the summer. And my professor was like, "Wow," was like that's the first time that I've ever heard anyone mention indoor football as a interesting thing. And class was kind of like silent after that. But yeah, IFL guy till I die. But yeah, it's just great. The Desert Hawks too. I will say the NAL before the NAL was poached by the Arena Football League, they had a good core of franchises, and can't really say that much now because they had to pretty much pick at the remains of the American Western Football Conference, I think it was, and then grab a couple of other suspect franchises. But I mean, the Desert Hawks have a good foundation. I mean, I can't imagine as much to do in Odessa. I don't want the Odessa Chamber of Commerce to come at me. Um, this is an opportunity for them to roll out the red carpet for both of us and like show us. So maybe I'm doing this on purpose so they can show us what there is to do in Odessa. But yeah, so I'm excited. Hopefully, I'll be able to pull up to a game this summer, in Odessa for a Desert Hawks game because I think the Ector County Coliseum, it's I think I don't think I think the only arena in America that has more history than the Ector County Coliseum is Madison Square Garden because Ector County Coliseum's been around since the 1950s. Rich history of a lot of events there. What events I can't quite specify, but there have been events since the 1950s. There's a rich history. You walk in there, it's like walking in to the Smithsonian or the Taj Mahal. So, yeah, I really like that decision.
I think you're the first person who's ever made a comparison between the Hector County Coliseum and the Taj Mahal. Like, I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that has never been a comparison that's been made before.
I mean, it's just that awe-inspiring a venue. I mean, it's the Mecca of events in Odessa. Um,
Well, it's a full circle moment for me, because as a kid, I grew up, saw the movie Friday Night Lights, the Permian Panthers, and to now be able to support and potentially attend a football game, out there in Odessa and West Texas. I mean, that's, going back to what you were saying earlier about how many people on a Friday night in the community are actually pulling up to a game. I'm like, this man hasn't spent enough time in West Texas, and it shows because that they actually be pulling up to games on Friday nights out there. And I know I'm sure they take their arena football really seriously too. I did get a shout out from the Desert Hawks social media account on my post about making a decision where they said, everything is better in West Texas, especially the football. So I'm looking forward to hopefully getting to experience that firsthand.
I mean, they say that, but they obviously ignore what's happened the past 2 decades plus here at UTEP. That's
Well, El
that's take
Paso,
shots.
I
It's
feel like
West Texas.
it is, but I don't know. I feel like El Paso gets the short end of the stick out there. It's kind of on an island out there.
Yeah, it is true. I think it's better suited to be in New Mexico than it is in Texas. But still a great city. I love this place. Really do love this place. But I think that wraps up our conversation. Hopefully, look at the Wikipedia page for the Extra County Coliseum. Hopefully, you'll be able to show up to a game at the Jack Shack. I don't know how they got that nickname, but at the Jack Shack sometime soon. But Luke, do you have anything final you want to add? I'll let you promote your various platforms and works before we sign off.
No, yeah, if you're interested at all in the UFL or particularly the Birmingham Stallions, as you can see behind me here, I've got quite a bit of Stallion stuff up. So if you're interested in that at all, you can check me out at State of the Stallions on pretty much any social media platform. Also on YouTube, I've got a podcast about the UFL and specifically about the Birmingham Stallions. And then on Twitter, if you want sort of my non-UFL meanderings, my AFL meanderings, my college football meanderings, those kind of other leagues, then you can just search. My handle is at Luke Miller SOTS, and so you can see my retweeting all things CW and Sun Belt and Minnesota and SMU and Desert Hawks there. So I don't know what the Desert Hawks like slogan is. Oh, I think it's D's Hawks. D's Hawks. That was another selling point for me is that the coach always tweets and puts hashtag D's Hawks, and I don't know where that comes from or like what exactly how exactly that connects, but it cracks me up. So he always puts hashtag D's Hawks and hashtag Wings Up. So wings up, baby.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, yeah, Luke's a great follow. I mean, really, and anywhere that there is football, I mean, he is tweeting about it. Especially the Stallions too, which I mean, the Stallions chasing an undefeated season this year, so should be interesting. But yeah, definitely follow Luke's platforms on his personal account, which will be in the bio, and the State of the Stallions account, which will also be in the bio. But yeah, thanks Luke for joining bright and early for me. Maybe not so much for you. It's like it's 9 in the morning out in Texas, but yeah, thanks for joining. Look forward to the next time having you on the podcast. And everyone, thanks for joining as well. Hope you all are doing great by the time you see this. And until next time, everyone, peace, love, and soul. I'm the Burger Popper.